right? If I don't stop for, sometimes the way it's going to work is, right, if I'm telling you stuff, and like, if you don't get this part here, then I'm going to keep telling you more stuff, and it won't make any sense unless you got what I just said, right? So if you don't get what I'm saying, just like stop me for a second. And here's the thing. My experience is that if you have a question, there's a good chance that you're not the only one. Okay, because there's a good chance that other people also, right, you have a similar set of experiences, you have a similar thing going on, you're in the same class, you get similar things, and means you're not going to get similar things, right? So if you don't get it either, that means other people, or you don't get it, other people probably don't too, so you're doing them all a favor if you just stop the runaway train before it gets going too far. So please just do that. All right, how many of you are planning on going to university next year? Okay, that's good. So that's most of you. That's good. This will be helpful then. Try to use this as a chance, just as Mrs. Drew was saying, to sort of prepare and think through how lectures work, because this is mostly what you're going to get a lot of next year. Okay. Next question, as we get started, who knows what philosophy is? Just do a show of hands. We one maybe sort of. Okay, that's not bad actually. I'll take one. So what is it?
Oh well, I mean, it's basically covers a very broad subject, but I mean it generally can cover a lot of things. Basically, like why we're here and what things are, like what's the nature of reality.
Right. Yeah. Good. Right. In general, we sort of deal with what people call the big questions in life, right? Like the super big questions. What's important in life? How do I know that? Why are we here? These kinds of questions, okay? What philosophy technically means, or sort of the root of philosophy, so philosophy is a Greek word because at least in this part of the world, philosophy started in Greece, and it comes from two words. One, philia, which means love, so like Philadelphia, they call it the city of brotherly love, because that's what this word means, brotherly love. So that's where it comes from. And then Sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy, technically speaking, philosophy is the love of wisdom. Which means, theoretically, the task of philosophy is to help you be wiser, right? Which means to know, not just know a bunch of things about the world, which is a thing we can do, but know how to live your life a little bit better. Okay, so that's sort of the history, the background of what philosophy comes from. It's for that reason that we ask these questions like, why are we here? Right? What's the point of all this? How do I know the things that I know? These are questions that we ask in order to help us live better lives. Now, nowadays, philosophy also names sort of a specialized academic discourse, right? A certain discipline, a certain way of approaching things. Are we live streaming this, or is this just getting taped?
It's just getting taped.
Okay, that's all right. Otherwise, I was going to say hi to everyone at home, but okay. If you're not here because you're like on vacation still, you don't get a hello. So there, how's that? All right. Right, so in academic philosophy, right, it's people who take these questions and then think through them really far, like all the way to the bottom. And part of what comes out of that is, as with any sort of specialized thing, anytime you're dealing with people who sort of know a lot about something, right, they develop this in ways, or they start to use words as sort of shortcuts so they don't have to repeat whole conversations, right? So how many people here know something about cars? Okay, right, yeah, there's a few of you, right? I don't, yeah, I have a car. That's about what I know too, and I mostly know like how to point it in the right direction and make it go that way. But that's about what I got, right? But when I go to my mechanic or other car guys, right, and I have a lot of friends who are car guys, right, they talk about cars, and when they talk, I don't know what they're talking about. Right? They talk about things and parts of the car and all that, and I have no idea what they're saying, right? And it's just a thing, right? When we talk with people who know something about something, we use words that those people know. And so philosophy is similar, right? As the academic discipline has developed, they've developed a series of words and a series of things, and they use these words as sort of shorthands to indicate a whole bunch of stuff, but that way you don't have to say all that stuff every time. You can just use this one little word, right? And so part of what I'm here to do today is to talk to you about existentialism. Right? So this is one of these words which in philosophy, right, it means a whole bunch of stuff, but we just like, instead of saying all that stuff, I'll just use this word and then we're like, oh yeah, okay, we know what that means, right? Okay, good. But you guys don't know what that means, at least not yet. Actually, who does? Does anyone know what existentialism is? You're like, not after you told that other guy when he said yes, and then you made him talk about stuff. So I'm not going to remember anything anymore. All right. So yeah, I'm here to flesh out existentialism. I hear you're going to start talking about Hamlet soon. Is that true? Tomorrow already? Yeah. Okay. And one of the things with Hamlet is, one of the readings people do of Hamlet, or one of the ways people try to understand Hamlet, is in understanding him as sort of an existentialist feature. And did I hear you talking about Sartre? Have you read some
Yeah, a couple
stuff?
of these guys did The Wall, so they know a little bit.
Okay, good.
They're just too shy to say.
Is these guys in the front? Okay, good.
These guys on the road.
in the row, right? You're gonna be
Guy
my.
in the blue sweater.
All right. You're gonna be. you're gonna be my go-to people then, right? Sartre is one of the sort of the big name, the popular existentialist, right? But one of the things people try to do with Hamlet is sort of read him as an existentialist, right? And sort of as a way of trying to understand what's going on in the play. So I'm sort of here to help you understand what that means. But then, because philosophy is not just knowing stuff, but the love of wisdom, I'm also here going to try to help you understand a little bit about what existentialism means, but also then like what this means for you, right? Or what this means for our life, what this means about what it says about how we could live our lives, or what it means to be wise or to live well if existentialism is true about the way it sees the world. Okay, so that's sort of what I'm going to try to do in the next hour-ish or so. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? Now this is sort of the big picture, so at least I'm just trying to sort of let you know what's coming, give you some points to hang your hat on a little bit. So are we good to go so far? All right. Now, then let's start with existentialism. We're going to start with the short version, and then we're going to do a little bit of background. I'm not sure write you this. Here, why don't I write you this? I'll give you a little outline so you know what's coming. So first we're going to do what I'll call existentialism, the short version. So we'll give a really brief intro into that. We'll talk a little bit about it. And then we're going to do a bit of a history lesson. You're like, boo, history sucks. But this one will be better than other histories that you've had, I promise. Then, once we've had this history lesson, and you'll see sort of why we need the history lesson, hopefully that will become clear as we go through. Then we're going to move to sort of the long version of existentialism. And then, which I'll write up there in a second, so don't worry. All right, yeah. So then we're going to do the long version of existentialism. I'm just making sure I didn't miss any steps. Sort of unpack some key themes and theses and sort of what are its main constitutive elements. And then at the end, if we get to this part, my hope is that I won't have to do this part because you guys will already have done this part as we go through. But at the end, if we get there, we'll talk about a few objections, right? So this is what existentialism is. What are some questions people might be like, I don't know that that's such a good thing. Or I don't even know if that's a thing. Right? Whether it's a good or a bad thing, it might just not be a thing. And then you don't have to worry about whether it's good or bad. But that's what's coming. So the short version of existentialism goes something like this. Here, we'll keep this up so that you can kind of always track what we're doing. The short version of existentialism is that existentialism is the philosophical theory that says that existence precedes essence. So let me write that up here. Existence precedes essence. Now, hopefully you know what at least one of those three words means. The first book I published was called Futurity and Phenomenology, and people like my wife are like, I know maybe what one of those, I don't know. Actually, first they're like, I don't know what any of those words mean. And I was like, the second word is in. Like, you know what in means. Like, this is not complicated, right? Like, in. You can do this, right? Okay, they're like, okay, I know one, and then we're fine. So, existence There's nothing fancy. Existence is just what you think existence is, right? That something's being here somehow, right? It exists. There's all kinds of ways we can complicate about what it means or what kinds of things exist or whatever, but we're not going to do that. Right now we're just going to say existence is sort of what you think is something's being alive or being here in a way, right? This water bottle exists, the desk exists, you exist, I exist. Things exist when they are here in some meaningful sense, right? Usually empirically, but right, like they're alive, they're around, they're in the world somehow. They are things that are, they exist, right? So that's the first part. So something's existence precedes, of course, just means comes first, comes before. So existence, sort of being here, being alive, comes before essence. Now this is going to be a big word, so this is one we're going to have to talk a little bit about, and this is what our history lesson is going to be about in a minute. Essence is basically just, I'm not even going to write this down, you can try it without me writing it down. Essence is just sort of what something is. Okay? It's just sort of like what it means to be a certain kind of thing. And so you could say, for example, the essence of a chair is to be sat on. And what that means is something that is there to be sat on is a chair. Right? That's it. It's just sort of what something is or what makes something be the kind of thing that it is. Right? That's sort of that's what makes a chair different from a table. Well, a chair is for sitting on, and a table is for putting other things that aren't your butt on. And sometimes people sit on the table, and then it confuses things. And you're like, don't do that. That's not natural. Like, get away from there. That's not right. You're freaking me out. But, right, so that's sort of, in essence, is just what makes something what it is, as opposed to being some other kind of thing. Okay? And so, in generally speaking, in Western philosophy, which is the only thing I really know anything about, in Western philosophy, we tend to think that in some sense, your essence, what you are, defines your existence. Right? And what we mean is, right, your essence, because you are this kind of thing, that shapes how you're going to exist and how you live. Because you are a human being, right, you are that kind of thing. That is sort of the essence of what you are. You are a human being. Because you are a human being, you have, broadly speaking, this kind of physical shape. Right? You can be taller or shorter, you can be skinnier or fatter, as Mr. Aubrey was talking about a few minutes ago, but you basically have a certain kind of appearance, right? And that appearance and that kind of body makes you able to do certain kinds of things. As a person, you can, generally speaking, move around on the ground, but not in the air, right? You can't fly, because humans don't fly. We can make airplanes that fly, we can sit in the airplanes and the airplanes can fly us, but we ourselves can't fly. Right? So that's the kind of thing we mean. When we say an essence, sort of generally speaking, defines our existence, all we mean is the kind of thing you are shapes how you are, or it shapes your existence, shapes how you live in the world. It sort of shapes for you, tells you what you can and can't do. And generally speaking, trying to go against your essence is a bad idea. Right? If you try to go against your essence, you're more or less doomed to fail. Right? And again, this is just common sense. If your essence is, this is the kind of thing you are, right? So, yeah, let's stick with our human example for now. As a human being, part of your essence is that you cannot fly. So if you're like, I think I can, let's do that. It's probably not going to work. If you're lucky, you just like start from a flat surface and try to jump up and fly, and like, oh, and then your failure is just like you fall back down and people laugh and they think you're dumb. Except not at SCA, because we're anti-bullying. So then they just are like, ooh, that was a good effort, and I'm glad you gave it. We're showing love today. But if you're like you're like, no, I'm really going to do this. I'm going to climb to the top of a building. and I'm gonna jump off that building and that like gonna give me like a little, the push I need to really take off and fly, then your failure is gonna be a little bit more spectacular. Right? But either way, you're gonna fail because that's just not the kind of thing you can do given the kind of thing that you are. Right? That's the basic idea. So in general, we say your essence kind of shapes or defines your existence. Now, here's the thing about, again, this is the short version of existentialism. When existentialism says existence precedes essence, what it means is, or what it's trying to do is overturn the whole history of the way we've thought about the relationship between essence and existence. Right? Where we've just been talking about how essence sort of shapes or defines your existence, they're going to say the opposite. They're going to say your existence defines your essence. How you live shapes and answers defines what you are, and not vice versa. Okay, so that's sort of the short version. Now we'll do a brief history lesson of sort of essence and what that means, so you can try to understand a bit more about why this is so important. But again, before we get into that, are there questions so far? Yeah.
What questions are you going to try to answer with this conversation, or give us? I think it would be helpful if you gave us those questions beforehand.
What do you mean, what kinds of questions?
Well, you're already talking about the way that you live is going to affect what you become.
Right.
So, like a question like that, how do you live? Does how you live affect what you become, or something like that? Do you have more questions like?
Oh, okay. Let's sort of like that, like where I'm going. Well,
to define what you're talking about.
yeah. No, that's good. That's a good question. In general, I would say, maybe I'll put it this way, which I think is still answering your question. In general, what I'll say, sort of what's going to be at stake in the conversation, is I'll just say this. I try not to make big claims because then I have to live up to them. But what's going to be at stake in the conversation, I think this is fair to say, is like everything about everything in your life. Right? Like really, if existentialism is right, then everything is on the table. Everything you're going to do in your life, everything you want to do, everything you don't want to do, all your reasons for why you do and don't do things, all of that stuff comes on the table, right? If existentialism is right. So the big part, the thing to sort of the major questions that are going to be are questions like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this thing and not something else? And who gets to say, who or what, let me put it that way, who or what gets to decide what I'm going to do with my life and why I'm going to do it? And I would say those are probably the three big questions that we're going to be talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay, then. Okay, we're okay. All right, so let's do. Yeah, we'll be.
You can erase that sentence.
And I can erase it. Really? It's like an old school chalkboard.
Works.
Still works. Bought it in 1964, but it still works. Don't know why we'd have to buy a new one. My goodness, you guys are cheaper than me. I like it. I'm impressed. All right. So what we're going to do here, we're going to go through sort of, like I said, a brief history of essence, or how we've understood the concept of essence and its relationship to existence in Western philosophy. It's going to go back about 2,400 years or so. Broadly speaking, if you like to organize your notes, and you should organize your notes, it's helpful. What we're going to do, there's going to be sort of two different answers, so like two different columns that we're going to trace through three different historical periods. So we'll end up with a grid of like 6 different choices that are going to sort of more or less fall under one category, 3 periods, one category, 3 periods. Does that make sense? So we will begin. Okay. Category 1 is what I'm going to call sort of outside the world. So the categories are going to be about sort of where essences are, so to speak. And category 2 is then going to be inside the world. Right? So this will be the fundamental dividing line. The first period we'll start with is then what we in the business of philosophy call the ancient period. This is mostly the Greeks. So Plato, Aristotle, people like this. Roughly 400-ish years before the birth of Christ. Right, so if you start there, because like I said before, this is where sort of Western philosophy starts in this era, in this place. With this guy. There's a guy named Plato. He starts sort of Western philosophy, and his idea, Plato and his disciple Aristotle will be the next choice, and they sort of, he's here and Aristotle's here, and they sort of define the terms of Western philosophy for the rest of Western existence. And not just Western philosophy, but through Western philosophy, sort of Western life. So these ideas I'm saying should make, like you should be able to sort of identify, or they should make sense to you in terms of like, okay, yeah, that's kind of like this, like that makes sense, right? These are things that still are operative in our world today. So Plato starts here, and his idea is that essences exist as real things, like somewhere out there. Someplace what we would call heaven, right? Like outside the world somehow, but still comes in and shapes and affects the world. And so what he says is, let's see how, I'll try to give you, where we go? Yeah, that's where we are. Try to give you nice bumper sticker answers, because everybody likes bumper stickers. That's about all I know about cars. Existence is sort of a copy of, let me put it that way, or a shadow of essences. Okay, so what he wants to say is somewhere out there, up in heaven, there are, he calls them the forms, but there are the real true essences of things. There is the form of chairness. And every actual chair is a chair because it participates somehow in the form of chairness. There is a form, which is a sort of banal or unhelpful example. Somewhere out there exists beauty itself. And everything and anything that is beautiful only insofar as it participates somehow in beauty. Right? The nature of beauty with a capital B. The real beautiful. Okay? And then the way to understand those things, the forms, essences, beauty, justice, truth, all those kinds of things, the way to understand them, the way that we come to access them, because they're outside the world, the way we come to know them is through philosophical thinking and through philosophical dialogue. Right? So you want to know what's most true about the world, you got to talk about it with philosophers. And they will help you come to understand that. Right? So these conversations like, what is justice? What is truth? And we talk through those and we talk our way through that, and that's how we come to know what's really true about the world. Okay? We call this, I should have put that on top. This view of essences and the relationship to existence is called something like, we'll call it Platonic realism. Right? Platonic because it comes from this guy named Plato, and realism because he thinks essences are real and really exist somewhere out there. And then we can come to know them through thinking about them, or through philosophy especially. Next, as I said, his disciple is Aristotle. Aristotle, one of Plato's students, and is like, Plato, you're mostly right except about the biggest and most important thing, and that's where you're wrong. But otherwise, you're mostly right. And he gives us a view that is called, this is a fun word, you can use this at parties, it sounds smart, hylomorphism. Now, what this really means, again, if you want some, hopefully you've got this structure in place by now, because I'm going to erase that chart. Okay? What this means is, again, I'll give you a few Greek words. Hule is a Greek word, and it means sort of matter, like stuff, just like raw stuff that you can do things with. And then morphe is form. Okay, and so the idea here is you've got both of those things together. You've got matter, there's raw stuff, and then there are form. The forms literally give form to the raw stuff. They make the raw stuff in this kind of shape and not that kind of shape. They organize it into this kind of thing and not that kind of thing. All right, so in that case, if you want to think about it this way, for him, morphe forms, but this is also, in his case, essences. Essences are kind of the organizing principle that makes raw stuff into particular kinds of things. Right? So because you are a human being, you have the form or the essence of humanity, right? You are the essence of human being is sort of, and what that is has taken some raw stuff that's out here and shaped it into this particular kind of thing that's able to do these particular kinds of things, right? That this body enables me to do. Right? And so in his case, right, so in that case, that's why he's in the inside camp, because essences are not out there somewhere, they're right here. Right? They are literally what shapes my body to look like this and not something else. Not like, let's say, that. Right? This is the essence of chair. The form of chair is what shapes raw stuff into this kind of shape and not this kind of shape. In this example, we would say, as I was just talking about giving shape there, here we would say essence gives shape to existence. I'll erase this so it's not confusing for later. Right, so here existence is just a shadow of essence. Essences are real and out there, and everything down here is a little bit less real. Right? Beautiful things here are not as beautiful as the beautiful itself. Right? They're a little bit beautiful, but they're not the beautiful. Right? So they're not quite as real as the essences. Whereas here he says essence gives shape to existence. It literally shapes existence into looking the way that it looks. Alright, so these are the two basic models for how we understand things. And in this case, insofar as essences give shape to our existence, give shape to material stuff, and are located therefore in the world, we can come to know them by studying the world. So Aristotle is what we would call, he's the first in Western philosophy or Western history, he is the first what we would call scientist. They didn't call themselves that yet. That word didn't come up till quite a bit later. But right, he's the first person who looked at the world and is like, I can learn things about what's really true about the world just by studying the world, right? And looking at this, and that's going to help me. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a little bit confusing the way you just said those two things, because if essence is a thing and existence is its shadow, then essence is giving shape to the shadow. So they're really saying the same thing, aren't they?
Except that in this particular case, right here, the giving shape is sort of like a literal physical giving shape. Like his account of the world is, there's more or less just a bunch of raw stuff, kind of like Play-Doh. And then essences are like those little molds that you use when you're playing with Play-Doh, you know, and you like stamp it and like, oh look. Well, actually, I shouldn't use Play-Doh because that's confusing with that. Let's talk about making Christmas cookies. So you've got a bunch of raw batter, and it's just there, right? And then you've got these little forms, and you're like, I want candy canes. So you take the form of a candy cane, and you like stamp it in there, and now the stuff is shaped like a candy cane, right? Like it's that literal kind of giving shape. And it adheres, that's why it adheres in the physical form itself. I can understand it by looking at the physical form, right? What you're seeing when you look at me is me, but also partially the essence of human being, right? Whereas on this case, the essence is up there somewhere. But
I was just commenting on how funny the sentences sound, because like the shape of your shadow is dependent on what you look like, and that's
right,
just why the sentences say
yeah. All right, yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Just a question was like with how Plato was thinking, was his belief kind of that like we'll never actually know true beauty, we just know things that participate in it?
Oh, that's a good question. Plato, because some people later in the Western tradition, we call them skeptics. They came a couple hundred years or so after Plato. Plato himself is not skeptical in that sense. He thinks we can know the true forms themselves, but we know them so we can look at the world, and that sort of helps. We look at beautiful things, and that sort of helps us go, oh yeah, this is beautiful, and wait, that's beautiful, and that's beautiful, and then he says, and that makes us think, but if all these things are beautiful and they're all super different, what makes them beautiful? And then he says, then we can look to understand, so what is beauty? He says, then we stop looking at the world to understand what is beauty, and we have to start looking with our mind, or with him, he would say the rational part of our soul, right? But he thinks in doing that, especially through philosophical conversation and understanding philosophy, or we can have these conversations, we can in fact come to understand the beautiful itself. And his point is, this is the task of philosophers, once you understand the beautiful itself, then when you engage with the world around you, you have a much better way of seeing beauty in the world because you know what you're looking for. Right? So he does the same thing with justice. Once I understand what justice itself is, now I'm in a much better position to sort of help run the city. Because I'm not just like, what would be good or what would be bad. I was like, I know what justice is. I know what justice itself looks like. Now I know how to make these things kind of participate in justice a little bit more. So he definitely thinks you can find them. Later, people come along and are like, I don't know if you can find them, right? And that's where sort of the skeptical tradition starts. But Plato himself still thinks you can know that. Yeah, it's a good question.
So, like, Plato believes that you see beauty, but that's not like a true beauty. Eventually, you can find true beauty, whereas Aristotle believes that you see beauty, that is beauty.
Aristotle, yeah, I think so, right? Broadly speaking, he would say you can see beauty itself in some way, shape, or form. Now, again, you see instances of, like, but yes, he would say you can come to see it, or you. So the big difference here, I would say, and I think this is what you're getting at, is like how important our what's the word I'm looking for? Our senses are, like our empirical senses, right? Can they give us truth? And Plato is like, not really. They can help you on the path, they can help you see the need to understand truth, but if you want to understand truth, you do it through philosophy, which is through thinking. Right? All you can get with the senses is just sort of a shadow or a bad picture or something. Whereas for Aristotle, our senses can, because it shapes matter, our senses can start to give us real understanding about the real nature of the world. Right? So yeah, that's a good. And in that sense, right, well, one of the ways of talking about this difference here is this side works by what we call rationalism. The way to understand the true nature of things is by thinking about them. And on this side is what we call empiricism. The way to understand the true nature of things is by touching them, or tasting them, or seeing them. Right? This, our empirical senses will give us access to the way the world really is. In general, broadly speaking, you can decide this for yourself, but as we get down to more contemporary ages, this distinction remains. Most of our culture now falls on this side of the spectrum right now. Right? Mostly we're like, yeah, if you want to know what's true about the world, right? Who really knows about the world in our current society? Certainly not people like me. Right? People talk about philosophers like you guys, like it's just a bunch of opinions that you guys have and you just talk about stuff. And it's great and interesting and stuff, or maybe it's not, but like, that's what you're doing. But scientists, now they know stuff. Right? Like they're working with real true things and they really know what's happening. Right? Chemists and biologists and people like that. Okay? Anyway, we'll get to that. So round 2, this is sort of round 1. This gets repeated, Western philosophy, again, this broad structure gets repeated